The question about whether IVF is moral or immoral does not transfer to the child created. So a child created via IVF is no less valuable and is not immoral. The act of using IVF, I would argue, is immoral.
No, this is something that we've talked about with Robbie Lashua when he was on here, Flynn, and we talked about like the ultimate desire of chasing things, and that's you define that perfectly, Tyler. Of like really like the Christian needs to recognize, and again, if the world's listening and paying attention and wanting to understand where we're coming from, we hope that you hear that the desire is something that we give to the Lord as the Christian. Like the desire is something that we are learning to give to him, and he will, like when we talk about desires in the scripture, when it talks about God will give us the desires of your heart, the context of that in the beginning of that verse says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. So like Tyler said, if you ultimately chase happiness in your marriage and you put everything in and you just like fully surrender and seek to know the creator of marriage first, that's fundamental in that situation, and understand what marriage is and sacrifice and surrender, it will like ultimately come to a happy marriage. And that's the same thing with any of our desires. When you desire something, but you first give that to the Lord and you say, Lord, I am content and joyful in serving you in whatever you have for me and whatever you give me, then he turns that into you being, or him being your desire. So then you find contentment and satisfaction in a circumstance, whether you have a child or not. And that's really like the foundation, I think, of this emotionalism, is that we have to encourage people in a one-on-one situation, when we're talking on a platform and talking about these things, we're building a basis so that you can bring it down to your personal, because everyone watching, we don't know your personal life. Every single people watching, whether 10 people watch this video or 10 million people watch this video, every single one of you are an individual soul and have a circumstance that is different than anything we know. We don't know your circumstance, but God does. And these are things that you can truly surrender and give to him to help work through that process instead of taking it into your own hands. And I think that's really like, that's like the higher view for an answer for me when I hear these things. But I think it really needs to be like punched through to help understand, Tyler. Cause there's like this wandering question for me on people maybe thinking, okay, so if you're saying that if it was 100% always going to happen, is it still okay? Is it still bad? So if you could have 100% successful rate of IVF, okay. Yeah. Thank you for the clarification. So if you went in and you didn't have to have 15, the person is saying, I walk by faith, not by sight. And I, trust the Lord, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do one, and it's guaranteed 100% because I'm trusting the Lord and not in the scientific process. Is it still wrong?
Yeah, I would say you still run into a lot of ethical issues in it, and I would say it's still wrong, which is why my position is referred to as principled abstinence rather than practical abstinence. So ethicists who take a position of practical abstinence would say if you could guarantee create one embryo, implant one embryo, and get one child, then, or at least one child, because, embryo can divide and then you can have twins or triplets. But if you could guarantee one embryo equals one pregnancy equals birth of a healthy baby, then numerous Christian ethicists would say, then it's totally fine. So they're essentially just saying, we need more technological development. I would disagree with that because of how that treats the child. And this is the theological categories, theological anthropology. So what does the Bible describe about what a human being is? And you and I, when we did our church podcast on this, I pointed out four doctrines or 4 points of theology that you need to have in order to agree with the Orthodox tradition of uh, of Christianity. And Orthodox not meaning capital O, Eastern or Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox, but Orthodox in terms of what all Bible-believing Christians have believed since the close of the New Testament. And those 4 points are that all people are made in the image of God. And I'll throw this out there again. This is something Kyle and I talked about in the podcast for my church, but all people being made in the image of God means regardless of the technology used to create them. So it could be no technology or it could be IVF, but the question about whether IVF is moral or immoral does not transfer to the child created. So a child created via IVF is no less valuable and is not immoral. The act of using IVF, I would argue, is immoral. But all children are created in the image of God. Now we have to ask questions about what the image of God is. I believe the best evidence biblically for what the image of God is that we who are made in God's image are a representational presence of God in this world. That we exist to represent to the rest of the created order and to humanity who God is. And then part of that representational presence is that because God is king, we are sub-rulers over the domains and dominions he has given us. So the first thing is we're all made in the image of God, and we have to ask the question, does IVF help me, or is an embryo created via IVF able to represent God in the same way, or is that hindered? And the attached question to that is that embryo able to rule and reign as God intended that embryo to? If you're making a 1-to-1, you might be fine there. But if you are freezing any embryos, you are in violation of that, because we were made to develop as representational images of God, and we cannot reign over that which God has given us to reign over underneath him. As Flynn pointed out, I'm an under shepherd, so he's the king, we're sort of princes, we're underneath him, we're under rulers. So if you're freezing the embryo, you are not allowing that embryonic person to develop to the point that they are practicing their representational presence and having dominion. So you can't, I would say, you just cannot freeze embryos. But again, if you're doing we made one, we're implanting one, and we're going to get one, then maybe you pass that. Second thing that you need in your theological anthropology is you need to understand that Christ is the fulfillment of the image of God. So you have to look at Christ and you have to ask yourself, am I developing Christ-like character, or am I hindering this embryo from developing Christ-like character? Does the process of IVF help or hinder that? Because Jesus is the ultimate image of God. And for this, I would look at the 3-point kind of line that you can draw from Genesis 1:26 and 27 to Psalm 8, and from Psalm 8 to Hebrews 2:9. Because what you're going to see there is Psalm 8 is a song that David writes on the basis of Genesis 1:26 and 27. He's looking at Genesis 1:26 and 27, and he writes this song about what is man that you, O God, are mindful of him. You have made him just a little bit lower than the angels. Essentially, David's asking, like, wow, we're really amazing creatures. God, why did you make us this way? Why do you care about us so much? Your love is so overwhelming to me. That's what David's thinking. The author of Hebrews is going to take that concept applied to all of humanity, and he is going to say that that's most true of Jesus Christ. And so he's going to draw a through line he's going to draw a thread through that and create a through line. So we need to understand that if Jesus is the ultimate man, which you can find in other places in scripture, those are just kind of a 3-point line I like to sketch out. But if Jesus is the ultimate man, then we have to ask the question, does IVF help me embody his humanity and live as as a human person in his model, or not? Or am I hindering the development in that way. And I would say, again, you're going to run into a problem if you're freezing embryos. If you freeze embryos, you are not allowing them to develop the characteristics of Jesus Christ, just full stop. So you're going to be in conflict with both the image of God and what's called a Christological image of God. The third point you need is dualism, or more specifically, holistic dualism. Holistic dualism argues that dualism argues that we are made body and soul. Holistic dualism argues not only are we made body and soul, but those things are meant not to be separated. In this life, they will be separated by death, where our bodies die and our souls are waiting the resurrection and our resurrected bodies. But just point of Christian doctrine, death was not created by God. Death enters the world when sin enters the world. And so if death is aberrant to God's original created design, then we can say that the only time in which body and soul are separated is something that God did not want as part of his creation and is going to rightly do away with. So then the separation of body and soul shouldn't happen. So the question is, does IVF honor the fact that we're made in body and soul? And I would argue no, it doesn't. And the reason for this is you cannot look at the embryos apart from their ability to implant, and you're thinking primarily through the lens of the physical embryo itself. So if an embryo implants, or actually right now how they do it is they grade embryos. So if they make, let's say an evangelical couple goes into an IVF clinic and they have 5 embryos made, they're going to grade those embryos on which is the best of the 5, and they're going to argue for implanting them in that order. They're going to give them an A through F grade, just like you get in school. Now think about that. You're grading an embryo on the basis of only the biological. You're not thinking about this embryo as a person, as a soul as well. And so you're going to run into a problem there. Now, again, Kyle, your example was, well, what if we can do a 1-to-1? Mm-hmm. The only way scientifically to do that, since not all embryos are created equal, is you would have to somehow manufacture the embryo in such a way in which you're guaranteeing the best possible embryo, which means, again, you're thinking through the lens of this embryo as a mere biological entity. You're not thinking about the fact that this is an ensouled human being. And the second is you're going to be thinking about it as the product of technology, not as a human being, because you are manufacturing. Now, technology doesn't have souls, and technology, the way we think about technology is we think about technology through the lens of efficiency and productivity. Well, as soon as you start thinking about efficiency and productivity, you've removed humanity from the equation. Because humans we are not particularly productive, and we are not efficient. Life isn't supposed to be productive and efficient primarily. That actually is a Marxist way of viewing the world, in terms of a person is a product of their work. And so the application of technology becomes very problematic. And if you were to do that, to draw out just kind of a stark contrast, as soon as you bring money into it, you have a Marxist view of, a person by judging them on the basis of productivity and efficiency. And then as soon as you bring money into it, you have a capitalist view of an industry. And so you have already conflicting forces, which are just, a whole bunch of wild ways we could take that. But the sum total of that little portion of this discussion was, no, it doesn't honor the body-soul makeup of a human being. And then the third thing is, and this is where IVF just cannot clear the hurdle no matter how it's done. No matter how far the technology advances, it can't clear this hurdle. And that is that the Bible quite clearly teaches, as you read, Kyle, in Psalm 127, I believe, that human life is a gift from God, and it is a blessing. And gifts have a particular nature. So I know in America, with kind of the corporate and commercialistic view of like people's birthdays or Christmas, we have a very unique way of, just tell me what you want and I'll go out and buy it. Like, I have gotten so many terrible Christmas and birthday gifts from my wife where I think she'd love this, and then she doesn't. That now we're just at the like, hey, just ballpark for me like 5 things that you think would be great.
So I can't strike out. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, exactly. But honestly, one of the reasons why when we do that, my wife gets something she wants, but it's actually less meaningful to her, and it's less meaningful to me as the gift giver, because in that process of asking what it is that is wanted and curating the list, and at that point, it loses something of the nature of what a gift is.
Yeah.
Um, and that is where IVF is going to run into a big hurdle, is that we are trying to, in the same way we take control of giving with kind of this corporate commercialistic Christmas, we're sort of taking control of parenting and conception and the family with the same concept. So I would say you could not actually get IVF outside of the contemporary American worldview, because it doesn't make sense to think of children in that way outside of a contemporary American worldview.
Yeah. Wow.